A man spends 15 years believing he destroyed the only thing that ever mattered. He stops sleeping, stops hoping, stops saying his own name out loud because the sound reminds him of a ghost. His son. A child he held once, in a hospital room that smelled like blood and antiseptic before the world ripped everything away. They told him the boy vanished into the system. They told him the courts declared him dead. They told him to stop looking. He didn't stop. He just ran out of places to search. Now, in a freezing Montana garage, a 16-year-old stranger walks in carrying a motorcycle that shouldn't exist anymore, and the truth everyone buried is about to claw its way back to the surface. Stay with this one all the way to the end. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's ride. The rain had been falling for 6 hours straight, the kind of Montana cold rain that doesn't wash anything clean. It just makes everything heavier. Water pooled in the cracked asphalt outside the garage, black and reflective like spilled oil, catching the flicker of the single fluorescent tube that buzzed above the roll-up door. The sign outside read, Vance Mechanical, hand-painted, faded, the letters peeling at the edges like they were trying to disappear. Inside, Ryder Vance stood over a disassembled carburetor, his hands dark with grease up to the wrists. 43 years old. 6'2". Built like a man who once carried weight for a living and never fully put it down. His knuckles were scarred, old splits that healed crooked white lines crossing brown skin like a map of fights he no longer talked about. A cigarette burned between his lips, the smoke curling up past his jaw and vanishing into the cold air that leaked through every gap in the corrugated walls. He didn't look up when the rain got louder. He didn't look up when the wind changed direction and threw water against the side of the building like someone was hosing it down. He just kept working. That was the arrangement he'd made with the world. He fixed things. Engines, transmissions, fuel lines, things that could be diagnosed, disassembled, understood. Things that didn't lie to you. People lied to you. Systems lied to you. Courts and lawyers and social workers and every single institution that was supposed to protect a man's family. They lied with paperwork and procedure and polite voices that said things like, in the best interest of the child, while they erased a father from existence. Ryder set the carburetor down and wiped his hands on a shop rag that was already black. He reached for the coffee mug on the workbench, cold, hours old, bitter enough to strip paint. He drank it anyway. The clock on the wall said 9:47 p.m. He'd been in the garage since 5 in the morning, 16 hours. 17 if you counted the hour he spent sitting in his truck in the dark before dawn, staring at nothing, waiting for the willpower to walk inside and pretend today was different from yesterday. It wasn't. It never was. The nightmare was always the same. A hospital corridor, fluorescent lights, the sound of his wife screaming behind a door he couldn't reach. Then silence. Then a nurse walking toward him holding a bundle so small it didn't seem real, and the weight of his son in his arms for the first and last time, and the way the boy's fingers curled around his thumb like he already knew, like he already trusted. And then the scene would cut to black, and Ryder would wake up on the cot in the back room with his chest so tight he couldn't breathe. 15 years of that dream. Every single night. He crushed the cigarette in the ashtray made from a piston head and was reaching for another when he heard the sound. Not the rain, not the wind. Something mechanical, struggling, coughing. An engine that had no business still running, dragging itself up the gravel road toward the garage like a wounded animal looking for a place to die. Ryder straightened. His hand moved instinctively to the workbench drawer where a snub-nosed .38 sat under a shop manual. Not because he expected trouble, because he'd stopped expecting anything else. The headlight appeared first, a single beam, weak and yellow, cutting through the rain at an angle that said the front fork was bent. Then the silhouette. A motorcycle. Old, heavy-framed, the kind of bike nobody built anymore because the factories that made them had been bought, gutted, and turned into condominiums 20 years ago. Behind the handlebars, a figure too small to be riding something that size. Thin arms. A backpack. No helmet. Soaked through. The bike lurched into the gravel lot and died with a metallic shudder that Ryder felt in his own spine. The rider sat there for a moment, straddling the dead machine in the rain, and then slowly climbed off and stood facing the open garage door like a defendant facing a judge. A kid. 16, maybe 17. Dark hair plastered to his forehead. A jacket 2 sizes too big, soaked black with rain, the collar turned up around a face that was all angles. Sharp cheekbones, hollow cheeks, eyes too old for the body carrying them. He had a split lip that looked 3 days healed, and a bruise on his jaw that looked fresher. Ryder stared at him from inside the garage, the fluorescent light carving shadows under his eyes, and said nothing. The kid blinked rain out of his eyes, swallowed. His voice came out thin, fighting the wind. "You fix bikes?" Ryder looked past him at the motorcycle lying in the gravel. Even from here, even through the rain, something about the shape of it made his stomach tighten. The tank, the curve of the fender, the way the exhaust pipes wrapped under the engine. "Depends on the bike," Ryder said. "This one." The kid jerked his thumb over his shoulder without looking back. "It was my dad's, or it was supposed to be. I don't know. I found it." "Found it where?" "Storage unit. My adoptive mom's. She didn't know I knew the combination." Ryder didn't move from the workbench. His eyes stayed on the motorcycle. The rain was hammering it now, washing mud off the tank in streaks, and underneath the mud, underneath 15 years of neglect and rust and silence, the paint was showing through. Black, with a single silver stripe. His hands stopped moving. His breathing changed, just barely, a hitch in his chest that he buried before it reached his face. But something behind his ribs had shifted, like a bone resetting itself after a decade of growing wrong. "Come inside," he said. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice of a man who had spent 15 years learning how to feel nothing out loud. "Before you catch pneumonia." The kid hesitated, glancing back at the bike like he was afraid someone would steal it. Then he walked into the garage, his sneakers squelching on the concrete, leaving wet footprints behind him. He stopped near the space heater in the corner and stood there shivering, arms crossed, dripping onto the floor. Ryder poured coffee from the pot on the hot plate, the last of it, thick as mud, and held the mug out without a word. The kid took it. Their hands didn't touch. "What's your name?" "Eli." "Eli what?" The kid's jaw tightened. "Eli Hayward. That's what's on the papers. That's the name they gave me." Ryder's face showed nothing, but his right hand, the one hanging at his side, closed into a fist so tight his scarred knuckles cracked. Hayward. The name meant nothing to the world, but to Ryder Vance, it meant Laura Hayward. It meant a woman with dark hair and a laugh that sounded like forgiveness, and a family that owned 400 acres of timberland in western Montana that somebody wanted badly enough to destroy everything connected to it. "Sit down," Ryder said. He pointed to the stool by the parts shelf. "You're bleeding." Eli touched his lip reflexively, then pulled his hand away and looked at the blood on his fingertips. "It's old." "I'm not talking about your lip." He was right. There was a darker stain spreading through the kid's jacket near the left side, just above the hip. Not a cut. Something deeper. Eli looked down at it and his face went pale. Like he'd been running on adrenaline for so long he'd forgotten he was hurt. "I fell," he said. "Off the bike?" "Off a fence, 3 miles back. Someone was following me." Ryder felt the room shift. Not physically. The walls didn't move, the light didn't change. But the air between them tightened, the way air tightens before a storm breaks. And every instinct he'd spent 15 years trying to bury came flooding back like a river breaking through a dam. "Following you how?" "Black truck, no plates. Started behind me outside Whitmore. I cut through a field to lose them and hit a fence post." Eli's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking around the coffee mug. "I don't know who they are." "But you know why." It wasn't a question. The kid looked up at him, and for the first time something cracked behind those two old eyes. Fear, maybe, or the exhaustion that comes from carrying a secret too heavy for a 16-year-old spine. "Because of what's in the saddlebag," Eli said quietly. Ryder didn't move, didn't breathe. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and the rain hammered the roof, and somewhere outside the wounded motorcycle lay in the gravel, holding 15 years of buried truth in a rusted leather saddlebag. "Show me," he said. They walked out together into the rain. Ryder moved differently now. Not the slow, deliberate walk of a mechanic heading to a workbench, but the measured, aware stride of a man scanning sight lines and checking shadows. He positioned himself between the kid and the road without thinking about it. His eyes swept the tree line, the gravel lot, the darkness beyond the reach of the garage light. Old habits. The kind that don't die because they were never habits. They were survival. The bike was heavier than it should have been. Rust had seized the chain, the tires were dry-rotted, and the front fork was bent 15 degrees to the left. But the frame was solid. The engine, a 1,200 cubic centimeter V-twin that Ryder knew intimately, that he had rebuilt twice with his own hands in a different lifetime, was intact under the corrosion. He knelt beside it in the rain, and for a moment he wasn't 43 years old in a gravel lot in Montana. He was 27 in a garage that smelled like motor oil and sawdust, with Laura sitting on the workbench behind him, her bare feet swinging, telling him he spent more time with that bike than with her, and him turning around and saying, "That's because the bike doesn't complain about cold feet in bed," and her throwing a shop rag at his head and laughing. That laugh, the one he couldn't remember the sound of anymore, no matter how hard he tried. The saddlebag was still there. The leather was cracked and water-stained, the buckle corroded green with age. But it was the same bag. He could see the small burn mark on the flap where he'd dropped a cigarette 12 years before he ever knew what loss meant. His hands didn't shake when he opened it. He wouldn't let them. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag that had kept most of the moisture out, was a stack of papers. Letters. Military documents, discharge papers, service records, a DD-214 with his name on it. Photographs. A small spiral notebook filled with handwriting he recognized instantly, handwriting that hit him harder than any fist ever had. Laura's handwriting. And at the bottom, sealed in a separate Ziploc bag, a small digital voice recorder. Silver. Scratched. The brand name worn off from years of handling. Ryder stared at it. The rain ran down his face, and he didn't wipe it away. "I haven't listened to all of it," Eli said from behind him. He was standing under the edge of the garage roof, hugging himself against the cold. "I listened to the first part. That's how I found you." "What's on it?" "A woman's voice. She says she's leaving evidence in case something happens to her." Ryder's jaw clenched so hard he felt a molar crack. He closed the saddlebag carefully, stood, and carried it inside like it was made of glass. He set it on the workbench under the light and stared at it for a long time. Eli watched him from the stool, the coffee mug forgotten in his hands. "You know whose bike that is," the kid said. Not a question. Ryder didn't answer. He pulled a first aid kit from the shelf behind the workbench and set it on the counter. "Take your jacket off. Let me see the wound." "I asked you a question, and I'm telling you to take your jacket off before you bleed through it." The kid's eyes held his for a 3-count, defiant and frightened, and something else. Something searching, like a dog that's been hit too many times trying to decide if this new hand is different. Then he shrugged the jacket off and pulled up his shirt. The wound was ugly, but not deep. A long gash across his side where a fence post had caught him, the skin torn and bruised purple around the edges. Ryder cleaned it with iodine and closed it with butterfly bandages, his hands steady, his face blank. The kid didn't flinch, not once. That told Ryder more than any file or record could. A boy who doesn't flinch when you touch a wound has been hurt enough times that pain stopped being a surprise. "How long you been in the system?" Ryder asked, without looking up. "Since I was a baby. Foster homes till I was 4. Then the Haywards adopted me." "They good people?" Eli was quiet for a beat too long. "They're people." Ryder taped the last bandage and stepped back. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I got." The silence between them filled with the sound of rain and the ticking of the space heater and the low electrical hum of the fluorescent light. Ryder leaned against the workbench and crossed his arms, studying the kid the way he used to study engines, looking for the thing that was broken, the part that was failing, the stress point where everything would eventually give way. Eli was thin, not athletic thin, hungry thin, the kind of thin that comes from skipping meals, from growing too fast on too little, from a body that learned early to burn itself for fuel because nobody else was going to fill the tank. His clothes were cheap and worn. The jacket was a thrift store find, The jeans frayed at the cuffs, the sneakers held together with duct tape on the left sole. And his eyes, dark, almost black in the fluorescent light, with shadows underneath them that had nothing to do with the hour. Eyes that had seen the inside of enough rooms to know which ones were safe and which ones you slept with your shoes on. "Where are the Haywards now?" Ryder asked. "Home. Probably. I left 3 days ago." "They know where you are?" "They know I'm gone. They don't know where." "They looking for you?" Something flickered across Eli's face. Not pain, not anger, something colder. Resignation. The expression of a person who has stopped expecting anyone to come looking. "Mrs. Hayward might call the school Monday when I don't show up. Mr. Hayward won't notice till somebody tells him. They've got 2 bio kids. I'm the tax credit." Ryder absorbed that without reaction. He'd heard variations of that story 100 times in the years before everything went wrong. From soldiers who'd aged out of the system, from kids at the youth center Laura used to volunteer at, from men in lockup who'd spent their whole lives being nobody's priority. The details changed. The wound underneath never did. "You rode that bike 3 days? In this condition?" 2.5. I had to push it the last 12 miles. The clutch cable snapped outside of Garner. "From where?" "Billings." Ryder did the math. Nearly 400 miles on a bike that shouldn't have been running through mountain roads in November with a wound in his side and someone following him. 16 years old. Something in his chest twisted. Not pity, something deeper and more dangerous. Recognition. "You should sleep," Ryder said. "There's a cot in the back, blankets in the cabinet." I didn't ask what you need. I told you what's happening." Eli stared at him. Then he stood slowly, wincing as the bandages pulled, and walked toward the back room. At the doorway, he stopped. "That bike," he said without turning around. "My birth certificate says my father's name was Ryan Mathis. That's not the name on those military documents." Ryder's blood went cold. Ryan Mathis. The false identity. The name they'd given him in the prison database, the name on the forged records, the name that replaced Ryder Vance in every system, every file, every document, as if the real man had never existed at all. "The documents say Ryder Vance," Eli continued, "and the woman on the recording, she says that name too. She says he was framed. She says people wanted the land, and they took everything from him to get it." He paused. "She says he didn't know about the baby." The fluorescent light buzzed. The rain hammered the roof. Ryder stood perfectly still, his scarred hands gripping the edge of the workbench behind him, his knuckles white. "Get some sleep," he said. His voice was barely audible. Eli turned then and looked at him with those dark, searching eyes. "You know who Ryder Vance is?" "I know a lot of names." "That's not what I asked." The kid was smart. Too smart. Smart enough to ride 400 miles on a dead man's motorcycle to find a mechanic in rural Montana whose shop happened to share a last name with the ghost on a military discharge form. "We'll talk in the morning," Ryder said. Eli held his gaze for another long moment, then disappeared into the back room. The door didn't close all the way. Left open 2 inches, a habit of someone who needed to know the exit was always accessible. Ryder waited until he heard the creak of the cot. Then he walked to the workbench and stood over the saddlebag and the stack of documents and the small silver recorder, and he pressed his palms flat on the surface and bowed his head and breathed. Laura's handwriting stared up at him from the notebook. He could read the first line without picking it up. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me." He'd spent 15 years imagining what she might have known, what she might have tried to do, what she might have left behind. He'd searched for evidence, hired lawyers with money he didn't have, written letters to courts that returned them unopened, made phone calls to agencies that put him on hold until he gave up, knocked on doors that stayed shut, begged people who didn't care. And the whole time, the whole 15 years, the truth had been sitting in a rusted saddlebag on a motorcycle he thought was destroyed, waiting for a boy he thought he'd lost forever to bring it back to him. He reached for the recorder. His thumb found the play button. He held it there, not pressing, feeling the small plastic ridge against his skin. Laura's voice was on this device. He hadn't heard her voice in 15 years. He'd forgotten the exact sound of it. The pitch, the rhythm, the way she dropped her consonants when she was tired, the way she said his name like it was a question and an answer at the same time. If he pressed play, he would hear her again, and she would tell him things he'd been dying to know, and those things would either save him or finish the job that 15 years of grief had started. His thumb trembled over the button. Then he heard something outside. Not rain, not wind, an engine, idling. Somewhere on the road beyond the tree line, close enough to hear, far enough to hide. Ryder's hand left the recorder and went to the workbench drawer. The .38 was cold in his palm. He crossed the garage in 4 steps, killed the fluorescent light, and stood in the darkness beside the roll-up door, listening. The engine idled for 30 seconds. Then it revved once, a low, deliberate growl, and pulled away slowly, gravel crunching under heavy tires. Whoever was driving wanted him to know they were there. Ryder stood in the dark, the gun in his right hand, his dead wife's voice waiting in a machine on the workbench behind him, and his son, sleeping on a cot 15 feet away, unaware that the man who'd bandaged his wound and poured him coffee and told him to get some sleep was the same ghost whose name he'd been chasing across 400 miles of Montana highway. The rain kept falling, the darkness held its breath, and somewhere on that road, the black truck with no plates circled back toward the mountains, carrying passengers who had been searching for that saddlebag for 15 years, and who now knew exactly where to find it. Ryder didn't sleep. He sat in the plastic chair beside the workbench with the .38 in his lap and his back against the wall, watching the crack of gray light under the roll-up door. The rain slowed around 2 in the morning, stopped around 3. By 4, the silence outside was so complete he could hear the kid breathing in the back room. Slow, uneven breaths with a hitch at the top of each inhale where the wound in his side pulled against the bandages. He'd listened to part of the recording. Not all of it, just the first 90 seconds, with the volume turned so low he had to press the speaker against his ear like a secret. Laura's voice, tired, scared, speaking fast, the way she always did when she was trying to be brave about something that terrified her. My name is Laura Hayward Vance. I'm recording this on September 14th because I believe my life is in danger and I need someone to find this if I can't finish what I started. He'd press stop after that. Not because he didn't want to hear more, because he wanted to hear more so badly that his hands had started shaking and his vision had blurred, and he'd had to set the recorder down and grip the edge of the workbench until the wood bit into his palms hard enough to keep him in the room, in the present, in the body of a 43-year-old mechanic and not the 27-year-old man who'd held her in a kitchen in Billings and promised her nothing bad would ever happen. He'd lied, not on purpose, but the universe doesn't care about intention. It only cares about results. At 5:15, the first gray light crept through the gap under the door, and Ryder stood, holstered the revolver in his waistband, and walked outside. The air hit him like cold water, mid-30s, maybe lower, the kind of November morning in Montana where your breath comes out in clouds and the frost on the ground looks like broken glass. The motorcycle was still lying in the gravel where Eli had dropped it. In the daylight, without the rain, Ryder could see it clearly for the first time. His throat closed. The bike was destroyed, a ruin of rust and seized metal and cracked rubber. But it was his. Every bolt, every scratch, every hand-ground weld he'd laid down in a garage in Billings 17 years ago. The custom exhaust he'd bent himself using a pipe bender he'd borrowed from a guy named Dutch, who ran a welding shop off Route 12. The fuel tank he'd painted black with a single silver stripe because Laura told him it looked like a shooting star. He crouched beside it and put his hand on the tank. The metal was ice cold. He kept his hand there anyway. Somewhere inside the garage, the cot creaked. Eli was waking up. Ryder stood, wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist, a motion quick enough to be nothing, slow enough to be everything, and walked back inside. The kid was sitting on the edge of the cot with his shirt pulled up, looking at the bandages on his side. The blood had seeped through in the night, a dark stain the size of a fist on the white gauze. He looked up when Ryder appeared in the doorway. "Morning," Eli said. "How's the side?" "Stiff. Fine." "That's 2 different things." Eli let his shirt drop. "It's fine enough." Ryder nodded. He crossed to the hot plate and started a fresh pot of coffee, measuring the grounds by feel, his back to the kid. The silence between them was louder than the rain had been. "You listened to it," Eli said. Ryder's hands paused over the coffee pot. "Part of it." "Which part?" "The beginning." "Then you heard her name." "I heard it." "And you know who she was?" Ryder finished filling the pot and set it on the burner. He turned the knob. The coil glowed red, then orange. He watched it until the metal was bright enough to leave spots in his vision. "Her name was Laura," he said. "Laura Hayward." "Hayward Vance," Eli corrected. "That's what she says on the recording. Hayward Vance." Ryder said nothing. The coffee began to hiss. "So who's Vance?" Eli asked. His voice was careful, controlled. A kid who'd learned young how to approach dangerous conversations the way you approach a wounded animal. Slowly, from the side, never head on. "You already know," Ryder said. "I want to hear you say it." Ryder turned around. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms, and he looked at the kid. Really looked, for the first time since Eli had walked into his garage 12 hours ago. The jawline, the way his brow furrowed when he was thinking, the set of his shoulders, defensive and proud at the same time, like a fighter who'd rather take a punch than step backward. Laura's chin, Laura's stubbornness. But the eyes, the dark, watchful, calculating eyes, those were his. "Vance is the name on the sign outside," Ryder said quietly. "That's as much as I can give you right now." "Why?" "Because people are following you, and the more you know, the more danger you're in." "I'm already in danger. I've been in danger since I opened that saddlebag in Billings." "Then you understand why I need to make a phone call before this goes any further." Eli's eyes narrowed. "A phone call to who?" Ryder didn't answer. He walked to the far wall where a landline phone hung on a bracket. A rotary, ancient, the kind of phone that couldn't be tracked or hacked or monitored by anyone with a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection. He picked up the receiver and dialed a number he hadn't called in 6 years. A number he'd sworn he would never call again. It rang 4 times. 5. 6. On the 7th ring, a voice answered, deep, graveled, the voice of a man who smoked too much and slept too little and had seen the inside of enough dark rooms to know that phone calls before dawn never carried good news. "Yeah." "Cade." "It's Ryder." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. 4 seconds. 5. "You're dead," the voice said. "I know." "Court said so. Papers said so. Every brother who rode with you stood at your memorial and said so." "I know, Cade." 6 years. Not a word. Not a sign. Nothing. "I had reasons." "You had reasons." The voice on the other end let that sit. Then, lower, harder. "You have any idea what it cost me to put your patch in that box? You have any idea what I told the brothers when they asked why the club's best road captain vanished without a goddamn word? I need your help." Another silence. Ryder could hear breathing on the other end. Heavy, deliberate. The breathing of a man deciding whether to hang up or ride. "Where?" Cade said finally. "The shop." "You know where." "I know where." A pause. "How bad?" "Bad enough to call you." The line went dead. Ryder hung up the phone and stood with his hand on the receiver for a moment, his head bowed. Behind him, Eli was watching from the doorway. "Who was that?" "Someone I used to trust." "Used to?" Ryder turned. "Trust is a machine. It works until something breaks, and once it breaks, you never know if the repair is going to hold." He poured 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Eli, and sat down on the stool across from him. The workbench was between them, the saddlebag and its contents still spread across the surface. The letters, the photographs, the military documents, Laura's notebook, the recorder. "Those men in the truck," Ryder said. "Did you see faces?" "No, tinted windows. But I saw the truck twice before I left Billings, parked outside the storage unit the first time. Parked down the street from the Hayward's house the second." "Did you tell anyone what you found?" "Who would I tell?" The question hung between them like smoke. "The Haywards," Ryder tried. Eli's face hardened. It was a subtle thing, a tightening around the mouth, a flattening of the eyes, but it was the kind of hardening that takes years to develop. callous tissue over old wounds. Mr. Hayward told me my birth father was a deadbeat biker who cared more about his motorcycle than his own kid. He told me that every time I asked, every single time, from the time I was old enough to ask until I stopped asking. Eli's voice was steady, but his knuckles were white around the coffee mug. Mrs. Hayward would just leave the room. She couldn't even look at me when I brought it up. You think they knew the truth? I think they knew enough to stop me from looking. Ryder absorbed that. His jaw worked, the muscles in his temple jumping, and he stared at the stack of photographs on the workbench. He reached out and picked one up. A young man, lean, dark-haired, wearing a leather vest with patches on the chest, standing beside a motorcycle in front of a small house with a wraparound porch. A woman stood next to him, her hand on his arm, her head tilted against his shoulder, smiling. Ryder and Laura. Before everything. Before the conspiracy, the prison, the false identity, the death certificate, the 15 years of empty searching. Before the world decided that a man's family was worth less than 400 acres of timberland. He set the photograph down and slid it across the workbench toward Eli without a word. The kid looked at it. His hand trembled when he picked it up. That's her, Eli said. The woman on the recording. Yeah. And that's... Ryder met his eyes, said nothing. Eli stared at the photograph for a long time. His breathing had changed, faster, shallower, the breathing of someone standing at the edge of something they've been running toward their entire life. His eyes moved from the photograph to Ryder's face and back again, comparing, measuring, searching for the thing he was afraid to find. Your coffee's getting cold, Ryder said. Eli set the photograph down. His hands were shaking. Don't do that. Do what? Deflect. Don't deflect right now. I'm not deflecting. I'm keeping you alive. There's a difference. The sound of engines cut through the morning air before Eli could respond. Not one engine, but 3, maybe 4, approaching from the North Road in formation, the deep rolling thunder of V-twins echoing off the mountain slope behind the garage. Eli's head snapped toward the door, his body tensed, ready to run. Stay inside, Ryder said. He set his coffee down and walked toward the roll-up door, his hand resting on the .38 in his waistband. The bikes appeared around the bend in the road like a slow-moving storm. 4 machines, heavy-framed, road-worn, ridden by men who handled them the way soldiers handle weapons, with familiarity that borders on intimacy. They pulled into the gravel lot in a staggered line and killed their engines one by one, and the silence after the last motor died was heavier than the sound had been. The lead rider dismounted first, big, 6'4", maybe 240, with a gray beard that reached his chest and a leather vest so old the patches had faded to ghosts. His eyes were the color of wet concrete, and they locked onto Ryder with the intensity of a man who'd spent 6 years rehearsing this exact moment. Cade Sullivan, president of the Iron Veil MC, former Marine. Ryder's road captain before Ryder was his. The man who'd stood at a memorial service for a living man and buried an empty box because there was nothing else to bury. The 2 men stood 10 feet apart in the gravel lot, breath clouding in the cold air, and neither spoke. The other 3 riders stayed on their bikes, a signal of respect or caution, or both. Ryder recognized 2 of them. Mercer, the club's sergeant-at-arms, a wiry Texan with a prosthetic left hand he'd lost to an IED in Kandahar. And Boone, the youngest when Ryder left, now mid-30s with gray creeping into his temples and a scar across his forehead that hadn't been there 6 years ago. The 4th rider Ryder didn't know, young, late 20s, watching everything with the careful stillness of someone who'd been told stories about the dead man and wasn't sure he believed any of them. Cade took 3 steps forward, then he stopped. His right hand came up slowly. Not a fist, not a handshake, just an open palm held at chest height, fingers spread. The gesture of a man checking whether the person in front of him is real. You look like hell, Cade said. I've been told. 6 years, Ryder. I know. You know. Cade's voice dropped, and the thing underneath it wasn't anger. It was worse. It was grief compressed so tight it had turned into something sharp. You know what 6 years of silence does to a brotherhood? You know what happens when a man just vanishes and leaves nothing behind but questions? I couldn't contact you. I couldn't contact anyone. Couldn't or didn't? Couldn't. For the first 4 years, I was in a federal lockup under a name that wasn't mine. For the next 2, I was trying to prove I existed. Cade stared at him. The other riders exchanged glances but stayed quiet. Mercer's prosthetic hand clicked softly. An involuntary tick, the mechanical fingers opening and closing. A federal lockup, Cade repeated, under the name Ryan Mathis, a man who never existed, created by people who needed Ryder Vance to disappear. Why? Laura's family land, 400 acres of old-growth timber in the Bitterroot. Someone wanted it. I was in the way. She was in the way. Cade's expression changed. The sharpness softened and something older came through. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. The way a fractured bone starts to knit before it's fully healed. Laura, he said. What happened to Laura? She's gone, Cade. She's been gone since before I went inside. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need words. Cade looked at the ground. Mercer looked away, his jaw tight. Boone dropped his head. Even the young rider who'd never met Laura seemed to feel the weight of it. The way you can feel the shape of a hole even when you don't know what used to fill it. There's more, Ryder said. He told them. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. The saddlebag, the documents, the recording. The kid inside the garage who'd ridden 400 miles on a dead man's motorcycle to find a mechanic whose name matched a ghost on a military form. And the black truck, with no plates, that had followed the kid from Billings and circled the garage in the dark. When he finished, Cade looked past him toward the garage door. The kid. He in there? Yeah. He know who you are? He's working on it. You tell him? Not yet. Cade's eyes came back to Ryder's face, and this time the look in them was harder, more complicated. A mixture of understanding and warning. You need to tell him. I need to keep him alive first. Those aren't separate things, brother. That kid rode across Montana to find his father. If he finds out you've been sitting on the truth while he's bleeding on your cot, you'll lose him in a way that's worse than distance. Ryder's jaw clenched. He knew Cade was right. He'd known it since the moment Eli walked into the garage. But knowing and doing are different muscles, and the one that controlled the truth had atrophied from 15 years of disuse. I need to know what's on the rest of that recording first, Ryder said. Laura was documenting something. Names, dates, transactions. If those men are still operating, if they're still connected to whatever they built on her family's land, then the evidence on that recorder is the only thing standing between them and a clean escape, Cade finished, and they'll burn everything in their path to get it, including the kid. Ryder nodded. Cade turned and looked at his riders. Something passed between them, not spoken, barely even gestured, just the silent communication of men who'd trusted each other in rooms darker than this one. Mercer, Cade said, take Boone and scout the North Road. If there's a black truck with no plates within 20 miles of this property, I want to know about it. Mercer didn't speak. He just kicked his bike to life and rolled out, Boone falling in behind him. The sound of their engines faded into the mountain trees like distant thunder. Cade looked at the young rider. Wren, perimeter, eyes on every access road. Nobody comes within a quarter mile without me knowing. Wren nodded once and was gone. Then it was just the two of them, Ryder and Cade. Standing in the gravel lot in the early morning cold, their breath visible in the air, the ghost of a woman neither of them could save hanging between them like smoke. I didn't come back because I was ready, Ryder said quietly. I came back because I ran out of places to hide. Nobody asked you to be ready. The club buried you, Ryder. We mourned you. Some of the brothers moved on, some didn't. Mercer still sets a place at the table on your birthday. Empty chair, empty plate, full glass. Every year, 6 years. Cade's voice cracked on the last word, and he cleared his throat and looked away. You don't owe the club an explanation. You owe yourself one. And you owe that kid one. The rest is just noise. Ryder looked at the ground. His boots were wet with dew, and his feet were cold, and his hands were still stained with the kid's blood from last night's bandaging, and he felt for the first time in 6 years the full crushing weight of every choice he'd made and every choice that had been made for him. I don't know how to be his father, he said. I held him once. One time. In a hospital room. For less than a minute. Then start with the second time. That's how everything works. You do the thing once, badly, and then you do it again. Inside the garage, a sound. Eli appeared in the doorway, his eyes moving from Ryder to Cade and back again. His body was tense, the posture of a kid who spent his whole life walking into rooms where he doesn't know the rules. Cade looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Ryder. He looks like her, Cade said, barely above a whisper. Ryder's chest tightened. Yeah, he does. Cade walked toward the garage. He stopped 3 feet from Eli and studied the kid with the same steady, unreadable gaze he'd used on every prospect who ever stood before the club asking for a chance. You the one who rode that heap from Billings? Eli squared his shoulders. Yeah. On a bent fork, blown clutch cable, and a fence wound in your ribs. Yeah. Cade looked back at Ryder. He's yours, all right. Then to Eli. You hungry? I'm fine. That wasn't a yes or no question. That was a statement wearing a question mark. You're eating. He walked past Eli into the garage, and within minutes, the sound of a cast iron pan being set on the hot plate echoed through the building. Eli stood in the doorway looking at Ryder across the gravel lot. The morning light was on his face now, soft and gold, and it caught the bruise on his jaw and the scab on his lip and the dark circles under his eyes, and Ryder saw, clearly, painfully, with the precision of a man staring at a wound he can't bandage, every year he'd missed. Every birthday, every first day of school, every nightmare the kid had faced alone, every door that closed, every hand that didn't reach for him, every silence where a father's voice should have been. Those guys, Eli said, they're your friends? They're my brothers. What does that mean? It means they came when I called. Eli considered that. Nobody ever does that for me. Ryder felt something break inside his chest. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet structural failure, like a beam giving way in an old house. The kind of break you don't hear until the ceiling starts to sag. That changes today, he said. They ate in silence. Eggs, canned beans, toast burnt on one side, because the hot plate ran uneven. Cade cooked the way he did everything else. Efficiently, without ceremony, and with the unspoken expectation that you'd eat what was put in front of you and be grateful the pan was clean. Eli ate like a kid who hadn't had a real meal in days, quickly, hunched over the plate, his free arm curled around the edges like someone might take it. After, Ryder set the recorder on the workbench between the three of them. Cade leaned against the far wall with his arms crossed. Eli sat on the stool, his eyes fixed on the silver device. We need to hear the rest of this, Ryder said. He pressed play. Laura's voice filled the garage. Thin, shaky, recorded in a room that echoed like it was half empty. A storage unit, maybe, or a basement. She spoke for 11 minutes. She named names. Garrett Sable, a commercial land developer out of Helena with connections to state legislators. Dennis Fulcher, a county clerk who'd falsified property records and reclassified the Hayward timberland as abandoned. A third name, Richard Poole, identified as a former associate in the prosecutor's office who'd facilitated the false identity used to bury Ryder in the federal system. She described meetings she'd overheard, documents she'd photographed, a conversation between Sable and Fulcher where they discussed removing the husband as a precondition for acquiring the land through a forced probate sale. Her voice broke twice during the recording, once when she described realizing that Ryder's imprisonment wasn't accidental, and once near the end when she said something that made every man in the room stop breathing. I'm 8 weeks pregnant. He doesn't know. I haven't been able to reach him. I don't think they'll let me reach him. If something happens to me, this recording and the documents in this bag are the only proof that any of this happened. Please, whoever finds this, please find my husband. Please tell him about our child. Please tell him I never stopped fighting. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. Eli's face was white. He was staring at the recorder like it had reached across 15 years and put its hand on his throat. Cade hadn't moved. His arms were still crossed, his back against the wall, but his eyes were closed and his jaw was locked, and there was moisture tracking down his cheek into his beard that he made no move to wipe away. Ryder stood perfectly still. His hands were flat on the workbench. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing the garage. He was seeing a kitchen in Billings, and Laura standing at the counter, and the way she used to press her hand against her stomach when she was nervous, and how he'd never thought to ask why. She knew. She'd known she was carrying his child, and she'd recorded this, hidden this, knowing she might not survive long enough to tell him. "Ryder," Cade said. Ryder didn't respond. "Ryder?" He blinked. The garage came back, the light, the cold, the kid sitting across from him who was no longer a stranger and had never been one. Eli was looking at him. The searching look was gone. In its place was something raw and open and terrified. The expression of a person who has just found the thing they've been looking for and discovered it's bigger and more painful than anything they imagined. "It's you," Eli whispered. "You're him." Ryder opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You're Ryder Vance. You're my—" A phone rang. The landline on the wall, shrill and sudden, cutting through the moment like a blade through gauze. Ryder crossed the room and picked it up. Mercer's voice, low, urgent. "Ryder, they found us. 2 trucks, not 1. Coming up the South Ridge, armed, heavy. They've got the access road blocked." Ryder's hand tightened on the receiver. He looked at Eli. He looked at Cade. "How long?" he asked. 10 minutes, maybe less." The line went dead. Ryder set the phone down. He walked to the workbench and picked up the saddlebag, the documents, the recorder, Laura's notebook, and stuffed everything inside. He handed it to Eli. "Put this on. Don't take it off. No matter what happens in the next hour, you do not let go of this bag." Eli's hands were shaking, but he took it. "What's happening?" Cade was already moving, pulling a shotgun from under the bench seat by the door where he'd apparently stashed it before breakfast. He checked the breech, loaded 2 shells, and racked it with a sound that echoed off every wall. Ryder looked at his son. His son. And for the first time in 15 years, he spoke without the wall, without the deflection, without the careful distance he'd built between himself and every living thing. "I'm going to tell you the truth," he said. "All of it, everything, I swear to you. But right now I need you to trust me long enough to get you out of here alive." Eli stared at him. The bruise on his jaw, the wound in his side, the saddlebag hanging from his shoulder like an anchor made of paper and grief. "Okay," the kid said. Outside, the sound of engines, not motorcycles, rose from the tree line to the south. Heavy diesels, coming fast. And behind them, somewhere on the north road, the answering roar of Mercer's and Boone's V-twins screaming back toward the garage like cavalry riding toward a wall of fire. Ryder grabbed the .38, checked the cylinder, 5 rounds, 1 empty chamber, and walked to the door. The morning light had turned cold. The mountain shadows reached across the gravel lot like fingers closing into a fist. And the son he'd spent 15 years mourning stood behind him holding the only evidence that could destroy the men who had taken everything. Men who were now 10 minutes away from finishing what they started. There was no more hiding, no more silence, no more pretending to be a dead man in a dead-end town. Ryder Vance had been buried once. He was not going to let them bury his son. The first truck came through the tree line doing 40 on a gravel road that should have topped out at 15. It was a black Suburban, no plates, tinted windows so dark they looked painted, and it fishtailed around the bend and slid to a stop broadside across the mouth of the driveway, blocking the only road out. The second truck, a crew cab pickup, same black, same absence of plates, rolled in from the South Ridge Trail 30 seconds later and parked at an angle that closed the gap between the tree line and the garage, creating a wall of steel and glass that sealed the property like a coffin lid. Ryder counted 2 vehicles, capacity for 8 to 12 men. The Suburban's engine stayed running. The pickup killed its motor. Nobody got out. That was worse than if they'd come out shooting. Men who sit in trucks and wait are men with a plan. Men with a plan are harder to beat than men with anger. "Back door," Ryder said to Eli without turning around. "Through the shop, past the compressor, there's a steel door with a deadbolt. It opens to the tree line. You go through it, you head north, you don't stop until you hit the fire road. Follow it west 3 miles to the Garner Creek Bridge. Wait there." "I'm not leaving." That wasn't a suggestion, and that wasn't an answer. "I'm not leaving." Ryder turned. The kid was standing behind him with the saddlebag across his chest and his jaw set and his hands clenched at his sides. And the look on his face was the exact look Laura used to get when she'd made a decision and the conversation was over. The resemblance hit Ryder so hard he had to look away. Cade stepped between them. He put one hand on Eli's shoulder. Not rough, not gentle, the firm grip of a man redirecting a current. Listen to me. Your job right now is to survive. Everything else, the truth, the reunion, the conversation you need to have with this man, all of it depends on you walking out that back door with that bag on your chest. You understand? Eli looked at Cade, then at Ryder. His eyes were bright and furious and terrified. If I leave and something happens to him, I'll never... Nothing's going to happen to him, Cade said. Not today. Not while I'm standing here. The Suburban's passenger door opened. A man stepped out, tall, lean, wearing a gray overcoat that cost more than everything in Ryder's garage combined. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, clean-shaven, with the kind of face that belonged behind a desk or a podium or a judge's bench. He stood beside the truck and adjusted his cuffs and looked at the garage the way a man looks at a property he's already bought. Ryder recognized him, not from life, from the recording, Garrett Sable, the land developer, the architect, the man who had orchestrated the destruction of Ryder's family, the theft of Laura's land, and the burial of a living man under a dead man's name, all for 400 acres of timber that was worth more logged and sold than it was standing and beautiful. Sable didn't approach. He stood beside the truck and folded his hands in front of him, patient, professional, the posture of a negotiator who knows he holds every card. "Mr. Vance," he called out. His voice carried easily in the cold air. Smooth, controlled, the voice of a man who'd spent decades making ugly things sound reasonable. "I think we both know this doesn't need to end badly." Ryder stepped forward into the doorway of the garage, the .38 held low at his side. Behind him, he heard Cade rack the shotgun. "You're on my property," Ryder said. "I'm aware, and I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but you have something that belongs to me, and I've driven a considerable distance to retrieve it." "Nothing here belongs to you." Sable smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the thin, practiced expression of a man who has smiled at city council meetings and zoning hearings and private dinners where the dessert came with a bribe. The documents in that saddlebag were compiled by a woman who stole proprietary business records from my company. They were never hers to take. They were never yours to keep. And they are certainly not the property of a 16-year-old runaway who broke into a storage unit in Billings 3 days ago. So he knew about Eli. He knew about the storage unit. He knew about the timeline, which meant he had people watching, had been watching, for years, waiting for someone to find what Laura had hidden. "You've been sitting on this," Ryder said, "all this time, watching the storage unit, watching for the bag. I've been protecting my interests. Surely you understand that. Your interests killed my wife." The smile didn't waver. "Your wife died in a car accident, Mr. Vance. That's a matter of public record." "Your public record, your coroner, your county clerk, your prosecutor." Ryder's voice was low, flat, the voice of a man reciting facts he'd memorized in a prison cell under a name that wasn't his. "Dennis Fulcher, Richard Poole, you want me to keep going?" Something shifted behind Sable's eyes, a flicker, fast, gone almost before it registered, the flicker of a man hearing names he thought were buried. "I think," Sable said slowly, "that we should have this conversation in private, without the audience. The audience stays. Then perhaps I should speak more plainly." Sable's tone dropped, the smoothness replaced by something harder, like polished stone revealing the raw granite underneath. "I have 8 men in those vehicles. 4 of them are armed. The road behind you is blocked. The terrain to the north is 7 miles of forest with no cell coverage and no structures. You have a revolver, an old man with a shotgun, and a wounded teenager." He paused. "I'm not here to fight, Mr. Vance. I'm here to make an offer." "I don't want your offer." "You haven't heard it." "I don't need to." Sable tilted his head, studying Ryder the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. "The boy goes free. You go free. Your friends go free." The documents and the recording come with me, and in 72 hours, every forged record bearing your false name will be expunged. Your identity will be restored. Your wife's death certificate will remain as it is, an accident. But you'll have your name back, your life back, and you'll have your son. The word hit Ryder like a physical blow. Son. Sable knew. Of course he knew. He'd known for 15 years, known that Laura was pregnant, known that the child existed, known that the boy had been absorbed into the foster system and adopted by a family named Hayward. He'd known everything, and he'd let it happen, let a father spend 15 years believing he'd lost everything, because a grieving, broken man was easier to control than an angry one. You knew about him, Ryder said. His voice had changed, lower, rougher, the sound of something corroding from the inside. From the beginning. I knew the child existed, yes. And you let me search. You let me hire lawyers. You let me send letters and make calls and drive across 3 states looking for him. You sat in your office and watched me destroy myself looking for a son you could have led me to at any time. I allowed you to exhaust yourself. There's a difference. Ryder's finger found the trigger of the .38. Cade's hand landed on his shoulder. Heavy, firm, a weight that said not yet without a word. Take the deal, Ryder, Sable said. You've suffered enough. Take the boy and disappear, and let this end. Behind Ryder, inside the garage, a sound. Boots on concrete. Eli appeared in the doorway beside him, the saddlebag still strapped across his chest. His face was white, but his eyes were steady. He's lying, Eli said. Sable's gaze shifted to the kid, and for the first time something real passed across his face. Not anger, not surprise, something closer to annoyance. The irritation of a chess player watching a pawn move itself. Young man, you're lying about all of it. You're not going to let us go. You're not going to clear his name. You need those documents destroyed because they're the only proof that connects you to everything. The land theft, the framing, her death. Without them, you're clean. With them, you're done. Sable stared at the kid. Then he laughed. A short, clipped sound, entirely humorless. Smart boy. Smarter than his father. Don't talk about him like he's not standing right here. Eli, Ryder said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a command. Inside. No. Eli, I said no. The kid's voice broke on the second word, and in that crack, all the fear he'd been holding back came through. Not fear of the men in the trucks, not fear of the guns, but the older, deeper fear of the kid who'd grown up believing his father didn't want him, and now had to stand in a gravel lot and watch the truth reveal itself in real time, while armed men decided whether any of them would live to discuss it. The sound of V-twins cut through the standoff, close, loud, coming fast from the north. Mercer and Boone exploded from the tree line on their bikes. Engine notes screaming, gravel spraying as they slid to a stop on either side of the garage. Mercer dismounted with a pistol drawn. Boone stayed on his bike, blocking the gap between the garage and the north tree line. Then Wren appeared from the south trail on foot, moving fast. He came around the corner of the garage and stopped when he saw Sable, and his face did something complicated. A recognition that didn't belong on the face of a man seeing a stranger. Ryder saw it. Cade saw it. The silence that followed lasted 2 seconds, but it contained the full weight of a detonation. Wren, Cade said. His voice had changed. The paternal growl was gone, replaced by something clinical and cold. You know this man? Wren's eyes moved from Sable to Cade and back. His mouth opened, closed, his hand, the one resting on his hip, 3 inches from the holstered pistol, trembled. Cade, I can explain. You know this man. It's not what you think. Did you lead them here? The question hit the air like a bullet. Every man in the lot felt it. Mercer's prosthetic hand stopped clicking. Boone's engine idled down to a whisper. Eli took a step backward, his shoulder pressing against Ryder's arm. Wren's face collapsed. Not slowly. All at once. Like a building losing its foundation, the careful architecture of loyalty and brotherhood crumbling into the raw, terrified expression of a man caught between 2 forces that would both destroy him. They have my sister, Wren said. His voice was barely audible. They've had her for 2 months. They said if I didn't tell them where Ryder surfaced, they'd... He stopped, swallowed. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Cade said. Each word was a nail being driven into wood. You made yours. Cade, please. How long? Ryder cut in. He stepped forward, past Cade, his eyes locked on Wren with a focus that stripped everything else away. How long have you been feeding them information? 2 months, since they took Shelby. I swear, Ryder, I didn't know what they'd done to you. I didn't know about Laura, about the kid, about any of it. They told me you had stolen something from them. They told me you were a thief who'd run with company property. That's all I knew. That's all you bothered to know. Wren's eyes filled with tears. He was shaking, his whole body trembling, the leather vest with the iron veil patches shaking on his shoulders. My sister is 22 years old. She's all I have. They showed me a photograph of her tied to a chair in a basement and told me that if I didn't cooperate, the next photograph would be the last one. Cade closed his eyes. When he opened them, the fury was still there, but it had been joined by something heavier. The exhaustion of a man who has led other men through darkness and just discovered that the darkness followed them home. Where is she? Cade asked. His voice was level now, controlled. Where are they keeping her? I don't know. They rotate locations. They contact me through a burner phone that changes every week. I was supposed to confirm Ryder's location and signal when the kid arrived. That's what I did. Last night, when I took the perimeter watch, he looked at Ryder. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ryder stared at him. The anger was there, hot, immediate, the kind that makes your vision narrow and your hands go numb. But behind it, in the place where rage meets reason, he could see the shape of the trap. Wren was a tool, a lever, a pressure point exploited by men who understood that the fastest way to break a brotherhood is to threaten the things its members love. Sable was still standing beside the Suburban, watching all of this with the calm satisfaction of a man whose strategy is performing exactly as designed. You see the position you're in, Sable called out. Your own man gave you up. Your perimeter is compromised, and my patience, Mr. Vance, is not unlimited. Ryder looked at Sable, then at Wren, then at Cade, whose jaw was working like he was chewing on broken glass. Cade, Ryder said quietly, take Eli. The back door. The fire road. The bridge at Garner Creek. I'm not running. It's not running. It's repositioning. Don't manage me, Ryder. I was managing tactical retreats before you could ride. This isn't tactical. This is survival. They want the bag. They want the evidence. As long as Eli has it, and they don't, we have leverage. The moment they get it, we have nothing. Cade looked at Eli. The kid was still pressed against the doorframe, his eyes moving between the men like a spectator at a fight that's about to turn fatal. The saddlebag hung against his hip, heavy with the weight of a dead woman's testimony, and the only proof that any of this had ever happened. The boy stays with me, Cade said. Mercer, Boone, fall back with us. North Tree Line, Fire Road, the bridge. Move. What about Wren? Mercer asked. His voice was tight, his prosthetic hand clenched into a fist. Cade looked at Wren. The younger man was standing in the gravel with tears running down his face and his hands open at his sides, the posture of a man who has surrendered but doesn't know to whom. Wren stays, Cade said. He made his bed. Cade, Wren started, you betrayed your brothers. Whatever they do to you is less than what I'd do if I had the time. Cade's voice was ice, but his eyes held something that wasn't anger. It was grief. The grief of a man cutting away a part of his own body to save the rest. Wren's face crumbled. He sank to his knees in the gravel, his hands covering his face, and the sound he made was not a word. It was the sound of a man realizing that the worst thing he's ever done cannot be undone. Mercer and Boone rolled their bikes to the back of the garage. Cade took Eli by the arm, firmly but not roughly, and guided him through the shop. Eli twisted to look back at Ryder, his eyes wide, his mouth opening to say something that never came out. I'll be right behind you, Ryder said. He didn't know if it was true. The garage emptied. The sound of V-twins faded into the north tree line, swallowed by the forest like a secret the mountains agreed to keep. Ryder stood alone in the doorway, the .38 in his hand, facing Sable and his men across 30 feet of gravel and 15 years of hatred. Sable walked forward, slowly, deliberately, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel with each step. He stopped 10 feet from Ryder. "The boy is gone," Sable said. "Your friends are running, and you're standing here with 5 rounds and no backup. What exactly is your plan, Mr. Vance?" "To keep you talking long enough for them to disappear." "Admirable. Stupid, but admirable." Sable reached into his coat and produced a phone. He held it up so Ryder could see the screen. A photograph. A young woman, barely out of her teens, dark hair, terrified eyes, tied to a metal chair in a room with concrete walls. "Wren's sister," Sable said. "Shelby, 22, works at a veterinary clinic in Missoula, volunteers at an animal shelter on weekends. A genuinely good person." He paused. "I have 14 of those. Good people. Connected to men who know things I need to stay hidden. Leverage is not a concept I struggle with." Ryder's stomach turned. "How many families have you destroyed?" "None. I've redirected resources. Families are a byproduct." "Laura was a byproduct?" "Laura was collateral, an unfortunate necessity in a business transaction that required clean titles and clear ownership. She was warned. She chose not to listen." The blood pounded in Ryder's temples. His finger was on the trigger. 5 rounds, 1 man at 10 feet. He could end this. End Sable, right now. 1 squeeze. The conspiracy wouldn't die with him, but the architect would. But Shelby was tied to a chair somewhere, and there were 13 others, and Eli was running through the forest with a saddlebag full of evidence that would mean nothing if Ryder died in a gravel lot, and the men in those trucks tracked the kid down before he reached the bridge. "What do you really want?" Ryder asked. "I want the recording. I want the documents. I want the notebook. And I want to guarantee that neither you nor the boy will ever surface with any of this." "You want us dead?" Sable tilted his head. "I want you irrelevant. Dead is simply the most reliable method." Behind Sable, the Suburban's doors opened. 4 men stepped out, big, professional, wearing tactical vests under dark jackets. Not thugs, contractors. The kind of men who work for money and don't ask what the job means. Ryder was outgunned, outnumbered, and standing in the open with no cover and no exit. The back door was 20 feet behind him. The tree line was another 40 beyond that. He'd need 12 seconds to reach the forest. The contractors could close the distance in 8. But he had one thing Sable didn't. He had nothing left to lose except the one thing he'd just found. Ryder raised the .38, not at Sable. At the propane tank mounted to the exterior wall of the garage, a 200-gallon tank that fed the shop's heating system, fully pressurized, 6 feet from the Suburban's front bumper. Sable saw where the gun was pointed. For the first time, his composure cracked. The smooth, negotiating mask slipped, and beneath it was the face of a man who'd spent 30 years controlling outcomes and had just encountered a variable he couldn't predict. "You wouldn't," Sable said. "I spent 4 years in a federal cell under a name that wasn't mine. I buried my wife from 1,000 miles away. I lost my son before I knew he existed. You want to know what I wouldn't do?" Ryder's voice was steady, certain. The voice of a man who has crossed every line the world drew for him and found nothing on the other side worth protecting except the boy running through the forest behind him. "You don't know the answer to that question, and neither do I." The contractors froze. Sable's jaw tightened. The propane tank sat in the cold morning air like a silent verdict, and the muzzle of the .38 held its center like a period at the end of a sentence. "Tell your men to back up," Ryder said. "Tell them now." Sable didn't move. His eyes calculated, distances, angles, probabilities, the cost-benefit analysis of a man who has always been able to buy his way out of consequences and is now facing a currency he can't print. "Back up," Sable said to the contractors. His voice was tight. "All of you!" They retreated to the trucks. Slowly, reluctantly, but they moved. Ryder kept the gun on the tank and sidestepped toward the back door. 1 step, 2, 5. His boot hit the threshold. "This isn't over," Sable said. "No," Ryder agreed. "It's not. But the next time we meet, I won't be the one with nothing to lose. I'll be the one with everything to fight for." He turned and ran, through the shop, past the compressor, through the steel door, into the gray light of the mountain forest. The cold air hit his lungs like broken glass, and his boots broke through the frost layer on the ground, and his heart hammered against his ribs, and behind him, behind the walls and the trees and the sound of his own breathing, he heard Sable's voice, calm, controlled, giving orders. Find them, all of them. The boy doesn't leave these mountains alive. Ryder ran harder. The fire road was 3 miles north. Eli was somewhere ahead of him, carrying the truth, carrying the evidence, carrying the only chance they had. And behind him, the sound of engines starting. Trucks, not motorcycles. As Sable's contractors mobilized and fanned out into the forest like wolves with GPS coordinates, and the patience of men who get paid by the result. The trees closed around him. The mountain air burned his throat. And somewhere in the distance, faint as a heartbeat through stone, he heard the sound of a motorcycle, Mercer's or Boone's, echoing off the ridgeline like a signal fire made of sound. He followed it, running through frozen brush and fallen timber, the .38 in one hand, his dead wife's name on his lips like a compass heading, running toward his son, running toward the truth, running away from the dead man he'd been for 15 years and toward the war he'd been avoiding since the day they took everything from him. Garrett Sable wanted the evidence destroyed. Ryder was going to give it to the world. But first, he had to reach Eli before Sable's men did. And the forest was 7 miles deep, and the fire road was 3 miles north. And the boy was wounded, and the brotherhood was fractured. And the only bridge between the past and the future was a teenage kid who'd ridden 400 miles on a broken motorcycle to find a father the world told him didn't exist. The morning turned cold. The shadows lengthened between the trees, and Ryder Vance, dead man, ghost, fugitive, father, ran through the mountains of Montana toward the only fight that had ever mattered. He found them at the bridge. Garner Creek ran fast and black beneath the old timber crossing, a single-lane span built 60 years ago for logging trucks that no longer existed. The planks warped and split. The railings rusted through in places where the mountain weather had chewed the metal down to bone. Mercer's bike was parked on the near side, engine ticking as it cooled. Boone's was hidden in the brush 30 yards east, covered with pine branches in a hasty attempt at concealment that wouldn't fool anyone with a flashlight in 10 minutes. Cade stood at the center of the bridge with his arms crossed and his shotgun resting against the railing beside him. Eli sat on the ground near the far end, his back against a support post, the saddlebag clutched to his chest. Mercer crouched beside the kid, rebandaging the wound in his side with supplies from a first aid kit that looked like it had been riding in a saddlebag since the Clinton administration. Ryder came out of the tree line at a dead run, his lungs burning, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold. He slowed when he saw them, all of them, alive, intact, waiting, and something in his chest released, a pressure valve he hadn't known was locked. "How far behind?" Cade asked without turning around. 5 minutes. Maybe less. They've got vehicles on the main road and men on foot in the trees. How many on foot? At least 4. Tactical gear? They know what they're doing. Cade nodded. He looked down at the creek, then up at the ridgeline, his eyes scanning the terrain the way a general reads a map, not for beauty, but for angles of attack and lines of retreat. "Bridge is the only crossing for 2 miles in either direction," he said. "Current's too fast and too deep to ford. If we hold the bridge, we funnel them into a choke point." "We don't have enough ammunition to hold anything," Mercer said from beside Eli. His prosthetic hand clicked as he tied off the bandage, an unconscious rhythm, metal fingers opening and closing. "I've got 9 rounds. Boone's got his .45 with 2 mags. You've got 2 shells in that shotgun and whatever Ryder's carrying." 5 rounds, Ryder said. Mercer looked at him. 5 rounds. Against 8 to 12 professionals with body armor and long guns. He paused. "I've had worse odds, but not by much." "We don't need to beat them," Ryder said. He was breathing hard, his hands on his knees, sweat dripping from his jaw onto the frozen planks. "We need to survive long enough for the evidence to get out." "Get out how?" Boone asked. He'd emerged from the brush where he'd hidden his bike, his .45 drawn, his eyes sweeping the tree line with the focused calm of a man who'd done combat tours and understood that panic was just wasted energy. "There's no cell coverage for 12 miles. The nearest town with a sheriff's office is Garner, and that's 20 minutes by road, a road they've already blocked." "Not by road." Ryder straightened. He looked at Eli. "How's your side?" "It's fine." "Stop saying that. How's your side?" Eli's jaw tightened. "It hurts. I can move." "Can you ride?" The kid's eyes changed. The fear was still there, but something else rose beneath it. The same reckless determination that had carried him 400 miles on a broken motorcycle to find a ghost. "Yeah, I can ride." Ryder turned to Cade. "Mercer's bike. The kid takes it north on the fire road, past the ridge, down into the Garner Valley. There's an emergency broadcast station at the old fire lookout tower, decommissioned but still wired. If the transmitter still works, he can broadcast the recording on the emergency frequency. Every law enforcement scanner within 50 miles will pick it up." Cade studied him. "That tower's been abandoned for 8 years. The transmitter runs on a separate power system, solar-charged battery bank. It was built to survive forest fires and operate without grid power. If the panels aren't destroyed, the battery should still hold charge." "That's a lot of ifs. It's what we have." Cade turned to Mercer. "Give the kid your bike." Mercer didn't hesitate. He pulled the keys from his vest and held them out to Eli. The kid took them, his hand shaking but his grip firm. "Clutch is stiff," Mercer said. "Throttle sticks above 4,000 RPM. Don't fight the front brake. Tap it. And keep your weight low in the turns or you'll high side on the gravel." Eli nodded. He slung the saddlebag across his back, wincing as the strap pressed against his wounded side, and walked toward the motorcycle. He stopped beside Ryder. The two of them stood face to face in the gray morning light. The father who'd lost 15 years, and the son who'd spent those years being told the loss was intentional. Neither spoke for a moment. The creek roared beneath the bridge. The cold air smelled like pine sap and wet stone. "You need to say it," Eli said quietly, "before I go. You need to say it because I need to hear it, and you need to hear yourself say it." Ryder's throat closed. His eyes burned. Every defense he'd built, every wall, every silence, every careful distance, pressed against the inside of his chest like water against a dam, and the dam was cracking. "You're my son," Ryder said. His voice broke on the second word. "You're my son, and I didn't leave you. I never left you. I spent 15 years trying to find you, and I couldn't, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every day, every single day." Eli's face crumpled, not slowly. All at once, the way a teenager's face crumples when the thing they've been holding together finally becomes too heavy, and the tears came fast and silent, and he didn't wipe them away. He stepped forward and put his arms around Ryder. Not the careful sideways embrace of strangers, a full, desperate grip, his face pressed against Ryder's shoulder, his hands fisting in the back of Ryder's jacket. The saddlebag crushed between them. Ryder's arms closed around him, and he held on with the strength of a man gripping the edge of a cliff. And for 3 seconds that contained 15 years of silence, neither of them breathed. Then Eli pulled back. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at Ryder with red eyes and a jaw that was trying to be steady. "Don't die," he said. "That's the plan. That's not good enough. It's what I've got." Eli turned and walked to Mercer's bike. He threw his leg over the seat, turned the key, and kicked the starter. The engine caught on the second try. A throaty, uneven roar that echoed off the bridge and the trees and the creek below. He looked back once, his face pale in the early light, and then he twisted the throttle and rolled across the bridge and up the fire road, the sound of the engine fading into the mountain trees until it was just a vibration in the air, then a memory, then gone. Ryder stood on the bridge, his hand still raised in the position it had been when Eli pulled away, and listened until even the memory of the sound had disappeared. "He'll make it," Cade said from behind him. "He'd better. He's got your stubbornness and Laura's brains. That's a combination I'd bet on against anything." A sound from the south tree line cut the moment short, branches breaking, footsteps on frozen ground, the tactical cadence of men moving in formation through dense forest. Close. 300 yards, maybe less. "Here they come," Boone said. He moved to the south end of the bridge and knelt behind the stone abutment, his .45 braced on the railing. Mercer took position on the near side of the creek, using a fallen pine as cover, his pistol steady despite the prosthetic hand. Cade picked up the shotgun and stood beside Ryder at the center of the bridge. "Like old times," Cade said. "Old times were worse. Old times didn't involve your kid. That's why these are worse." The first contractor appeared at the edge of the tree line, a dark shape moving between the pines, rifle up, scanning. A second emerged 10 yards to his left. Then a third. They moved in a loose V formation, disciplined, spacing maintained, eyes forward, professional, quiet. The kind of men who'd done this before and would do it again tomorrow for the right price. Behind them, further back, Ryder could see the shape of Sable's overcoat between the trees. The architect was hanging back 50 yards behind his men, watching from a safe distance. Always the observer, never the one who got his hands dirty. The lead contractor reached the edge of the clearing at the south end of the bridge and stopped. He raised a fist. Halt! And the others froze. He studied the bridge, the positions, the terrain. His eyes found Ryder and Cade standing in the center of the span, exposed, armed, and clearly outgunned. "Vance!" the contractor called out. His voice was flat, professional, without malice. "The man behind me wants his property. Give it up and we walk. Nobody gets hurt." "The man behind you is a murderer," Ryder said, "and his property is evidence of it." "That's not my concern." "It should be. Because when that evidence goes public, and it will, everyone standing with him goes down too." The contractor considered that for a moment. Then he shrugged, a small, economical movement, and raised his rifle. The first shot hit the bridge railing 2 feet from Ryder's head, spraying rust and splinters. Cade and Ryder dropped simultaneously, Cade rolling left behind the stone abutment on the east side, Ryder going right and pressing flat against the bridge planks. The second and third shots punched through the timber railing above them, the sound of heavy caliber rounds splitting wood echoing off the mountain walls like broken bells. Boone returned fire. 3 controlled shots from his .45, the reports sharp and flat in the cold air. The contractors scattered into the trees, using the pines as cover. "Save your rounds," Cade shouted from behind the abutment. "They're going to try to flank." He was right. Within 30 seconds, 2 of the contractors had split off, one east, one west, moving along the creek bank, looking for a crossing point or a sight line that bypassed the bridge. The lead man stayed in the tree line, keeping up sporadic fire to pin them down. Ryder pressed his face against the cold planks and listened. The creek roared below him. Cade's breathing was heavy 3 feet to his left. Wood chips rained down with every shot that hit the railing. His .38 was in his hand, 5 rounds, 5 chances, 5 decisions that would determine whether Eli reached the fire tower or died on a mountain road with the truth strapped to his back. A movement to the west. One of the flanking contractors had found a narrow point in the creek, a stretch where the water spread thin over flat rocks, and was halfway across, his boots splashing in the ankle-deep current, his rifle held high. Mercer saw him. 2 shots from behind the fallen pine. The first missed, the second caught the contractor in the shin above his boot. The man went down in the creek, his rifle clattering on the rocks, and the current pulled him sideways as he screamed. "One down," Mercer said. His voice was calm, mechanical. The voice of a man who'd seen worse in Kandahar and survived by turning fear into arithmetic. The lead contractor in the tree line responded with a burst of fire that shredded the fallen pine. Mercer rolled sideways, bark and wood pulp raining down on him, and came up behind a boulder 5 feet from his original position. "I'm good," Mercer called. 3 rounds left." 3 rounds. Boone had maybe 10. Cade had 2 shells. Ryder had 5. Against at least 3 remaining contractors who had rifles and body armor, and the patience of men who were being paid enough to wait. The 4th contractor appeared on the east side of the creek, the flank Boone was supposed to be covering. But Boone had shifted position to support Mercer, leaving a gap. The man came up out of a ravine like a shadow, moving fast, his rifle up, angling for a shot at the bridge from the far bank. Ryder saw him a half-second before the shot came. He rolled sideways, the bullet punching through the plank where his chest had been, and fired the .38 from the ground, an awkward, upward angle, the recoil jarring his wrist. The shot went wide. The contractor adjusted, tracked, squeezed the trigger. Cade's shotgun bellowed. The sound was enormous, a concussive roar that shook the bridge planks and sent birds screaming from the trees in every direction. The contractor on the east bank staggered, his body armor absorbing the worst of the buckshot at 50 feet. But the impact knocked him off his feet and he tumbled backward into the creek with a splash that was swallowed by the current. "1 shell," Cade said, racking the pump. His voice was tight. 1 shell left. Then the shotgun was a club. Time compressed. The next 4 minutes happened in fragments, what? Snapshots of chaos separated by silences that lasted heartbeats. The lead contractor advanced from the tree line to the south end of the bridge, using the stone abutments as cover. Boone fired twice, pinning him down. The wounded contractor in the creek was crawling toward the bank, dragging his rifle behind him. Mercer put a round into the dirt 3 inches from his hand, and the man stopped moving. Ryder stayed low on the bridge, his .38 tracking the tree line, watching for Sable. The architect had disappeared, pulled back into the forest when the shooting started, retreating to the safety of his trucks and his phone and his network of leverage and threats. A general who fought by proxy and ran when the bullets were real. Then Ryder heard it, faint, distant, coming from the north. The direction Eli had gone. An engine. Not a motorcycle. A truck. Diesel. Coming from the wrong direction. His blood went cold. Sable had a third vehicle, positioned on the north road, waiting for exactly this scenario. The evidence carrier escaping north while the bridge fight held everyone's attention. "Cade," Ryder said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the gunfire like a blade. "They've got someone on the north road, past the ridge." Cade's face changed. The tactical focus shattered, and behind it was raw animal fear. Not for himself, for the kid on the motorcycle who was riding into an ambush he didn't know existed. "Go," Cade said. "I can't leave you here." "You can, and you will. Go. Take Boone's bike. It's in the brush east of the bridge." "Cade." "Your boy is out there, Ryder. Your boy. Go get him." The lead contractor chose that moment to advance. He came around the south abutment in a low crouch, rifle leading, and Cade swung the shotgun and fired his last shell at point-blank range. The contractor flew backward, his vest taking the blast, but his body absorbing the kinetic force like a car hitting a wall, and he hit the ground hard and didn't move. Cade dropped the empty shotgun and pulled a knife from his boot. An 8-inch fixed blade, the kind of knife that doesn't have a peaceful purpose. "Go," he said again. His eyes were on the tree line, his back straight, his breathing steady. An old Marine with an empty gun and a knife, standing on a broken bridge, buying time with the only currency he had left. Ryder ran. Off the bridge, down the bank, through the brush to where Boone had hidden his motorcycle. He tore the pine branches away, threw his leg over the seat, and hit the starter. The engine roared to life, louder than Mercer's, deeper, a sound that vibrated in his chest like a second heartbeat. He pointed the bike north and twisted the throttle until the front wheel lifted off the gravel. The fire road was narrow, unpaved, carved into the mountainside like a scar. Ryder rode it the way he used to ride, not with caution but with conviction, leaning into the turn so hard his knee nearly touched the ground, the rear tire breaking loose on the gravel and catching again, the engine screaming through the gears. The cold air tore at his face, ripped his breath away, froze the sweat on his skin. Tree branches whipped past like hands trying to pull him off the bike. He couldn't hear Eli's engine. He couldn't hear the diesel truck. He could hear nothing but his own bike and his own heartbeat and the sound of his teeth grinding together. The fire tower appeared first, a dark shape on the ridge above the tree line. Skeletal, its legs rusted, the observation platform at the top barely visible against the gray sky. Then 50 yards below it, the fire road opened into a flat turnaround area, and Ryder saw everything at once. Eli's bike, Mercer's bike, was on its side in the gravel, the engine still running, the rear wheels spinning in the air. The kid was on his feet, backing toward the tower, the saddlebag in his hands. In front of him, blocking the road, was a black pickup truck. 2 men stood beside it. One had a rifle. The other had Eli's arm. No, had Eli by the throat. One hand wrapped around the kid's jacket collar, lifting him onto his toes, pinning him against the truck's fender. The saddlebag was being pulled from his grip. Ryder didn't slow down. He didn't calculate odds or count ammunition or plan an approach. He pointed the motorcycle at the gap between the truck and the tree line and opened the throttle all the way, and the bike leaped forward like something unchained, and the sound of the engine hit the clearing like a war cry. The man with the rifle turned. Too slow. Ryder was on him before the barrel came up. The bike's front wheel caught the man's hip and sent him spinning into the gravel, the rifle cartwheeling through the air. The impact threw Ryder sideways, and the bike went out from under him, and he hit the ground hard, his shoulder taking the worst of it, gravel tearing through his jacket and into the skin beneath. He was up before the bike stopped sliding. The .38 was in his hand. The man who'd had Eli by the throat had released the kid and was reaching for a sidearm. Ryder shot him in the leg. The man dropped. Eli stumbled backward, choking, the saddlebag still clutched against his chest. The rifleman was crawling in the gravel, dazed, reaching for his weapon. Ryder stepped on his hand. The man screamed. Ryder kicked the rifle into the brush. "Eli, the tower, now!" The kid didn't argue. He turned and ran, limping, one hand pressed against the wound in his side, the saddlebag bouncing against his hip, toward the base of the fire tower. The ladder was rusted but intact, bolted to the steel frame, climbing 60 feet to the observation platform. Ryder covered him. The man he'd shot in the leg was writhing in the gravel, clutching his thigh, no longer a threat. The rifleman was face down, groaning, his crushed hand cradled against his chest. Ryder kept the .38 on both of them, his back to the tower, listening to the sound of Eli's boots on the metal rungs above him. 3 rounds left. The diesel engine was still running, which meant the radio inside might still be a sound from the south. Engines. Multiple engines. Trucks and motorcycles, the sounds mingling into a single roar that grew and grew until the trees shook with it. Ryder looked south. Through the tree line, through the gaps in the pines, he could see headlights. Coming fast. How many, he couldn't tell. The sound was too big, too layered, too complex. Above him, Eli reached the platform. Ryder heard the kid's boots on the metal floor, heard a door scream open on rusted hinges, heard the clatter of the saddlebag being set down. "There's a transmitter," Eli shouted down. His voice was thin in the wind, 60 feet above the ground. "There's a console. It has power. The green light is on. Find the broadcast frequency. There should be a dial marked emergency or channel 1. Set it and press the transmitter key." "I don't know how. You rode a motorcycle 400 miles with a bent fork and a blown clutch cable. You can figure out a radio." Silence above. Then the click of switches. The hum of a transmitter warming up. A low electronic tone that cut through the wind and the engine noise like a tuning fork pressed against the mountain itself. The headlights reached the clearing. 2 trucks. Behind them, the sound of V-twins. Motorcycles. Not 1 or 2. 5. 6. More. Ryder raised the .38, his 3 remaining rounds suddenly feeling like 3 grains of sand against an ocean. The first truck stopped at the edge of the clearing. The door opened. Sable stepped out, his overcoat flapping in the wind, his silver hair disarranged for the first time. His face was flushed, his composure fractured. Behind him, 2 more contractors exited the second truck, rifles ready. But the motorcycles kept coming. They poured into the clearing from the south road in a staggered column, engines thundering, headlights cutting through the gray morning like searchlights. 5, 8, 12. Men in leather vests, road-worn, hard-faced, riding machines that had seen more highway than most cars would see in a lifetime. Ryder didn't recognize the bikes. He didn't recognize the riders. They weren't Iron Veil. They stopped in a semicircle around the clearing, engines idling, forming a wall of steel and leather and sound that boxed in Sable's trucks from every side. The lead rider, a woman, mid-40s, with short gray hair and a scar that ran from her left ear to her chin, dismounted and walked to the center of the clearing. She looked at Sable. She looked at Ryder. She looked at the fire tower. "Cade called ahead," she said. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Said a brother needed backup." Ryder stared at her. "Who are you?" "Jess Morrow, Red Creek MC. Cade rode with my husband before he died. We owe a debt." She looked at the contractors, then back at Ryder. "Looks like it's time to pay it." Sable surveyed the clearing, the 12 motorcycles, the armed riders, the collapsed perimeter of his operation. His contractors looked at each other. The math had changed. 3 professionals with rifles against 16 bikers who looked like they'd been waiting their entire lives for exactly this kind of morning. Above them all, 60 feet in the air, the transmitter hummed. Eli's voice came through the wind, faint but clear. I found it. Channel 1. The recorder is connected. I'm pressing transmit. A click. A hiss of static. And then Laura's voice, thin, scared, 15 years old and timeless, filled the emergency frequency, broadcasting across every law enforcement scanner within 50 miles, carrying names and dates and evidence into the cold Montana air like a signal fire that could never be extinguished. Sable's face went white. He lunged toward the tower, but Jess Morrow stepped into his path, her hand on the pistol at her hip. Don't, she said. He stopped. Behind him, his contractors lowered their rifles, slowly, carefully, the decision of men who'd calculated the odds and decided they weren't being paid enough to die. The recording played on. Laura's voice echoed off the mountains, off the trees, off the bridge where Cade and Mercer were holding a line that no longer needed holding. It carried across the valley, across the ridge, across the frequency, reaching dispatchers and deputies and federal monitors who would, within the hour, begin unraveling a conspiracy that had survived for 15 years on silence and intimidation and the assumption that dead men stay dead. Ryder stood at the base of the tower, the 38 still raised, his body broken, his shoulder bleeding, his lungs burning from the cold and the running and the 15 years of grief that had finally found something other than silence to become. Above him, Eli's face appeared at the edge of the platform, looking down. The kid was crying. The wind pushed his dark hair across his forehead, and the tears ran down his face, and he didn't wipe them because his hands were on the recorder, holding it against the transmitter, holding the truth against the frequency, holding his mother's voice in the air where nobody could bury it ever again. Their eyes met. Father and son, 60 feet apart, connected by a voice that belonged to neither of them and both of them, and to a woman who had hidden the truth in a saddlebag on a motorcycle because she knew somehow that love is the only thing stubborn enough to survive 15 years of silence. Then Ryder heard sirens, distant, coming from the west, growing louder, and Sable heard them too. The color drained from his face, his hands dropped to his sides. The smooth, calculating mask he'd worn for 30 years finally cracked all the way through, and beneath it was something small and scared and utterly ordinary. The face of a man who had destroyed families and buried innocents and built an empire on forged documents in dead women's land, and who was now standing in a frozen clearing listening to the sound of his own destruction arriving on a frequency he couldn't block and a siren he couldn't silence. Ryder lowered the gun. His arm was shaking. His shoulder was bleeding through his jacket. His vision was blurring at the edges from exhaustion and cold and the adrenaline crash that was coming for him like a wave. But he didn't fall. Not yet. Not until he heard the sirens reach the clearing. Not until he saw the first cruiser's lights flash through the trees. Not until Eli climbed down from the tower with the saddlebag and the recorder and walked across the gravel and stood in front of him, shaking, bleeding, alive. I did it, the kid said. The whole recording. Every word. It went out. Ryder looked at his son. The bruise on his jaw. The wound in his side. The tears drying on his cheeks. The saddlebag strap digging into his shoulder. The way he stood. Straight, defiant, terrified, and brave in the same breath. Yeah, Ryder said. His voice was barely there. You did. And then his legs gave out. He went down on one knee, then both knees, the 38 falling from his hand onto the gravel. The world tilted. The sky spun. Eli caught him, grabbed his jacket, braced his weight, lowered him to the ground with strength that shouldn't have belonged to a wounded 16-year-old, but did. Dad, Eli said. The word came out broken, desperate. The voice of a child who has just learned a language he was never taught. Dad, stay awake, stay with me. Ryder looked up at his son's face against the gray Montana sky, and the sirens were screaming now. Close, so close, and the bikers were holding the perimeter, and Laura's voice was still playing from the tower above them, broadcasting the truth to everyone who would listen. And the last thing he heard before the darkness took him was Eli saying that word again, Dad, the word he thought he would never hear, the word that had been waiting 15 years to find its way home. He woke up in white. Not the cold white of snow or the sterile white of a prison ceiling. A softer white, warmed by fluorescent light filtered through a curtain, with the smell of antiseptic and something else underneath it. Coffee. Old coffee, the kind that sits on a burner in a hospital corridor for hours until it becomes something closer to industrial solvent than a beverage. Ryder blinked. The ceiling was tiled. An IV line ran from the back of his left hand to a bag of clear fluid hanging on a metal stand. His right shoulder was wrapped in heavy bandages, the kind that restrict movement, and beneath the hospital gown he could feel the tight pull of stitches across his upper chest where the gravel had torn through skin and muscle during the crash. He turned his head. It took more effort than it should have. Eli was asleep in the chair beside the bed, not sitting, folded, the way teenagers sleep in chairs that weren't built for sleeping, his legs drawn up, his head resting against the wall at an angle that would leave his neck sore for a week. The saddlebag was on the floor between his feet. His right hand hung off the armrest, his fingers curled loosely around the strap, holding it even in sleep. The bruise on his jaw had darkened to purple. The bandage on his side had been replaced. Clean, white, professional. Someone had given him a new shirt. It was too big. Everything was always too big on this kid. Ryder watched him breathe for a long time. The slow rise and fall of his chest, the way his brow furrowed slightly with each exhale, like even in sleep he was working through a problem he couldn't quite solve. The dark hair falling across his forehead. Laura's son. His son. Alive. Breathing. 15 feet away after 15 years of absence. The door opened. A nurse, mid-50s, tired eyes, efficient hands, checked the IV and the monitors without speaking. She glanced at Eli, then at Ryder. "He hasn't left that chair in 14 hours, she said quietly. "We tried to move him to a bed. He refused." "Sounds about right." "There's a man in the waiting room, large, gray beard. He's been there since you came in. Says he's your brother." "He is." She adjusted the drip rate and made a note on the chart. "You lost a fair amount of blood. The shoulder took the worst of it. Deep laceration, no tendon damage, but you'll be in a sling for 6 weeks. You also have 2 cracked ribs on the left side and a concussion." She paused. "The doctor says you're lucky." "The doctor doesn't know the half of it." She left. The door clicked shut. Eli stirred, not waking, just shifting, his hand tightening on the saddlebag strap in a reflex that had nothing to do with consciousness and everything to do with the 16 years of practice he'd had at holding on to things because nobody ever held on to him. Ryder closed his eyes. Not to sleep, to listen. To the beep of the monitor, to Eli's breathing, to the muffled sound of a television somewhere down the hall, tuned to a news channel, a reporter's voice saying words he couldn't quite make out but didn't need to. The broadcast had worked. Laura's voice, transmitted on the emergency frequency from an abandoned fire tower in the Montana mountains, had reached every law enforcement scanner within 50 miles. Within an hour, county deputies had arrived at the clearing. Within 3 hours, state police had established a perimeter. Within 6, a federal task force had been dispatched from Helena. Garrett Sable had been arrested at the scene, standing in the clearing with his overcoat buttoned and his hands in his pockets, watching the sirens approach with the expression of a man who has been running the numbers in his head and finally arrived at a total he can't negotiate. His contractors had surrendered without resistance. Professionals to the end. They knew the math had changed, and they weren't being paid enough to fight the federal government. Dennis Fulcher, the county clerk who'd falsified property records, was picked up at his home in Garner 6 hours later. He was eating breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast. He didn't resist. Richard Poole, the former prosecutor who'd facilitated Ryder's false identity and wrongful imprisonment, was arrested at his office in Helena the following morning. He'd been shredding documents when the agents walked in. The shredder was still running when they put the cuffs on. All of this Ryder learned later in pieces from Cade and from a federal investigator named Torres, who sat beside his hospital bed with a recorder of her own and listened while Ryder told the story from the beginning, from the land, from Laura, from the conspiracy that had buried a living man and killed a woman to acquire 400 acres of timber that was worth more to a developer than a family. Torres was thorough, patient. She asked questions that went back 15 years and forward to the present, and she wrote everything down in a notebook that filled up 3 times before they were done. When Ryder described the false identity, Ryan Mathis, a ghost name inserted into the federal prison system to make Ryder Vance disappear, Torres closed her notebook and sat quietly for a moment. "We'll need the original documents," she said. "The military records, the discharge papers, the forged booking records, and the recording." "The kid has them." Torres looked at Eli, still asleep in the chair. "He carried all of that from Billings?" "On a motorcycle with a bent fork and a blown clutch cable." Torres was quiet for a beat. Then she nodded. The nod of a professional who has seen enough of the world to know that the most important evidence is always carried by the people with the least reason to trust the system. "We'll need his statement too, when he's ready." "He'll be ready when I say he's ready." Torres didn't push. She stood, tucked her notebook under her arm, and paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mr. Vance, your wife's testimony is one of the most detailed and damning pieces of evidence I've seen in 20 years of federal investigation. She knew what she was doing when she made that recording. She was building a case." "She was building a lifeline," Ryder said. "There's a difference." Torres left. The room was quiet again. The monitor beeped. The IV dripped. Eli slept. Ryder lay there and thought about Laura. Not the Laura of the recording, scared, urgent, speaking into a machine in a storage unit because she had no one else to speak to. The other Laura, the one who danced barefoot in the kitchen to songs on a radio that only picked up 2 stations. The one who read books in the bathtub until the water went cold. The one who argued with him about everything, politics, dinner, the proper way to fold a map, and never once argued about the things that mattered, because on the things that mattered, they were always the same. She had known she was pregnant. She had known she was in danger. And instead of running, instead of hiding, she had built a case, documented the conspiracy, hidden the evidence in the one place she knew it might survive, the saddlebag of a motorcycle that belonged to the man she loved, in a storage unit she hoped someone would eventually open. She had bet everything on the future, on a child she hadn't yet met finding the truth she couldn't live long enough to deliver. And the child had done exactly that. Ryder wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the one without the IV, and breathed until the tightness in his chest loosened enough to let him speak. "Eli." The kid stirred, his eyes opened. Not slowly, not groggily, but all at once, the instant alertness of someone who's spent years waking up in unfamiliar rooms and needing to know immediately where he is and who's in the doorway. He saw Ryder. His face changed. The tension drained out of his shoulders, and he sat up straight and rubbed his eyes with his palms. "Hey," Eli said. "Hey. You're awake." "Apparently." "The doctor said you might sleep another day. You've been out for, I don't know, a while. How long?" "Since yesterday morning. Eli glanced at the window. The light outside was gray, the color of early dawn or late dusk. Almost 6 a.m. Thursday, I think. Whoosh, Ryder processed that. Nearly 24 hours, the longest he'd slept in 15 years. "You've been sitting in that chair the whole time?" Eli shrugged, the shrug of a teenager trying to make something enormous look casual. "Where else would I go?" The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples spread outward through everything, through the 15 years, through the foster homes, through the Hayward house, where he was the tax credit, through the 400 miles of broken highway, through the fire and the gunshots and the tower and the broadcast, and all of it, leading to this, a kid in an oversized shirt sitting in a hospital chair asking where else he would go, because the answer, for the first time in his life, was here. "Come here," Ryder said. Eli stood. He walked to the bed. He didn't sit on it. He stood beside it, his hands at his sides, his shoulders tight, the posture of a boy who wants to be close but doesn't know the protocol because nobody ever taught him. Ryder reached out with his good hand and put it on the back of Eli's neck, gently. The way you touch something you're afraid of breaking. Eli's breath caught. His jaw trembled. He stood there, perfectly still, absorbing the weight of a father's hand like a desert absorbing rain. Slowly, deeply, as if every cell in his body had been waiting for exactly this and didn't know how to stop drinking. "You did good," Ryder said. "You did so good." Eli's face crumpled. He sat down on the edge of the bed and put his forehead against Ryder's shoulder. the uninjured one, and cried. Not loud, not dramatic. The quiet, shaking, airless crying of a person who has been holding everything together for so long that the act of letting go feels like a kind of dying. Ryder held him. One arm, the good one, wrapped around his son's shoulders, and he held on. The monitor beeped, the IV dripped. The morning light crept through the window, and two people who had been separated for 15 years by lies and paperwork and 400 acres of timberland sat together in a hospital room and did the only thing left to do. They stayed. 3 weeks later, the snow came. It covered the mountains first, a white line across the ridges that crept lower each day until it reached the valley floor and turned the gravel lot outside Vance Mechanical into a blank page. Ryder stood in the garage doorway with his arm in a sling and a mug of coffee in his free hand and watched it fall. The flakes were thick and slow, the kind of snow that means business, the kind that settles in and doesn't leave until spring decides it's ready. The garage was different, not physically. The corrugated walls were the same, the fluorescent tube still buzzed, the hot plate still ran uneven. But the silence had changed. It used to be the silence of a man who had stopped expecting company. Now it was the silence between conversations, the temporary quiet of a space that was learning how to be occupied by more than one person. Eli was inside, under the hood of a '94 pickup that belonged to a rancher named Garza, who lived 8 miles up the road. The kid had no formal training, no shop classes, no apprenticeships, no mechanic father showing him the difference between a socket wrench and a torque wrench on a Saturday afternoon. But he learned fast, faster than fast. He absorbed information the way he absorbed everything else, hungrily, completely, with the focused intensity of someone who had spent his whole life teaching himself things because no one else volunteered. Ryder watched him work, the way he tilted his head when he listened to an engine, the way he wiped his hands on his jeans instead of the shop rag because the shop rag was always out of reach, the way he muttered to himself when he hit a problem, a low-running commentary that was half diagnosis and half argument. Laura used to do the same thing, talk to herself while she was figuring something out. Ryder hadn't remembered that until he heard Eli doing it, and then the memory came back so clearly it was like a door opening in a wall he'd thought was solid. "Fuel line's cracked," Eli said without looking up. "There's a split about 2 inches below the filter housing, probably been leaking for a while. Replace the whole line or patch it." "Replace, not. The rubber's brittle all the way down. Patching it just moves the problem." "Good call." Eli glanced at him. Quick look, almost shy, the flicker of a smile that appeared and disappeared before it could be fully seen. The praise meant something to him. Everything meant something to him. Every word Ryder said was being cataloged, stored, examined, tested against 16 years of silence and abandonment stories, and Ryder knew he had to be careful. Not careful like fragile, but careful like precise. Every sentence was a brick. He was building something that had never existed before, and the foundation had to hold. Cade came by on Thursdays. He'd ride down from the chapter house 40 miles north, park his bike in the gravel lot, and sit in the plastic chair by the workbench drinking coffee and saying very little. Sometimes he and Ryder talked about the investigation. The federal case was proceeding slowly, the way federal cases do, with depositions and discovery and motions that seemed designed to delay accountability as long as bureaucratically possible. Sable's lawyers were fighting everything. Fulcher had turned state's witness. Poole was negotiating a plea. But sometimes Cade didn't talk about the case at all. He just sat and watched Eli work on whatever engine was on the bench that week, and his face would do the thing it did when he was thinking about something he couldn't say, a slight tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw. And then he'd drain his coffee and stand up and put his hand on Ryder's shoulder and say something like, "Kid's got steady hands," and that would be enough. Mercer came too, though less often. He was quieter than before. The events at the bridge had added a layer to his silence, a weight that sat behind his eyes like sediment at the bottom of a river. His prosthetic hand still clicked when he was thinking, but the rhythm had changed, slower, more deliberate. The rhythm of a man who was reassembling something inside himself, piece by piece, the way you reassemble a machine that's been through a war. Boone stopped by on weekends. He'd started volunteering at a youth center in Garner. Teenagers in the foster system, Kids aging out with nowhere to go and no one to call. He never talked about it much. He'd just show up at the garage on Saturday afternoons with a six-pack of soda and a bag of sandwiches and sit on the tailgate of his truck and eat with Eli like it was the most natural thing in the world. No agenda, no program, just presence. The kind of showing up that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Wren was gone. Cade had made the call, not with anger, not with ceremony, but with the quiet finality of a man closing a door that couldn't be reopened. Wren's patch had been returned. His name had been struck from the roster. But Cade had also made another call, to Jess Morrow and the Red Creek MC. And within 48 hours of the arrests, Shelby, Wren's sister, had been found in a rented house outside Missoula, frightened but unharmed, guarded by two men who surrendered the moment they realized their employer was in federal custody and their paychecks had stopped clearing. Wren had disappeared after that. Nobody knew where. Nobody asked. The Brotherhood's memory was long, but so was its understanding of the impossible choices that men make when the people they love are in danger. Cade never spoke Wren's name again, but on the wall of the chapter house behind the bar, there was a small photograph of a young man in a leather vest with the Iron Veil patch on his chest, and nobody took it down. Jess Morrow called once, 3 weeks after the clearing. Ryder answered the phone in the garage, his shoulder aching, the snow falling outside. "Your boy doing okay?" she asked. "He's doing." "That's a start." A pause. "Cade told me about Laura. I'm sorry. She sounds like she was something. She was everything." "Then her kid is too. Don't forget that on the hard days." She hung up. Ryder stood by the phone for a long time, holding the receiver against his chest, listening to the dial tone like it was music. The legal process took months. Torres and her team dismantled the conspiracy layer by layer. The forged property records, the falsified death certificate, the manufactured identity of Ryan Mathis, the network of officials and intermediaries who had facilitated the theft of the Hayward land. Laura's recording was the spine of the case, but the supporting documents, the photographs, the military records, the notebook full of dates and names and transactions, provided the skeleton that held everything together. Ryder testified twice, both times in a federal courtroom in Helena, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't fit and a sling he was supposed to have stopped wearing 2 weeks earlier. He spoke for hours. He told the story from the beginning, from the land, from Laura, from the night he was arrested under a name he'd never heard and transported to a facility where nobody knew who he was and nobody cared to find out. Eli testified once. He sat in the witness chair with the saddlebag on the table in front of him. The prosecutors had wanted to enter it as an exhibit, but Eli had refused to let it out of his sight, and the judge, after looking at the kid's face for 3 seconds, had allowed it. He spoke clearly, steadily, without emotion. He described the storage unit, the discovery, the ride from Billings, the men who followed him, the garage, the bridge, the tower. He described what it was like to grow up being told his father was a man who didn't care about him. And then he described listening to the recording, his mother's voice, a woman he'd never met, speaking to a future she couldn't see, building a case she couldn't finish, fighting for a family she wouldn't live to hold. The courtroom was silent when he finished. The judge removed her glasses and pressed her fingers to her eyes. The prosecutor stared at her notes. Sable's defense attorney didn't cross-examine. 3 months after the trial, Ryder's name was officially restored. Every forged record was expunged. The death certificate was vacated. The identity of Ryan Mathis was erased from the federal database as if it had never existed. Because it hadn't. It was a ghost name, a bureaucratic weapon, a paper coffin built for a living man by men who needed him to disappear. Laura's death was reclassified. The accident that had killed her was reinvestigated, and while the evidence was too old and too degraded to support a murder charge, the federal report concluded that her death was consistent with the pattern of intimidation and coercion documented throughout the conspiracy. It wasn't justice. It was the closest thing to justice that 15 years of distance would allow. The land, the 400 acres of Hayward timberland that had started everything, was returned to the estate. Ryder signed it over to a conservation trust the same week, with a single condition. The land would remain unlogged, undeveloped, and open to the public in perpetuity. The trust was named the Laura Hayward Vance Memorial Preserve. On the day the paperwork was filed, Ryder drove to the property with Eli. They stood at the edge of the tree line, old-growth pines, tall and straight, their tops disappearing into a sky the color of cold water, and looked at the land that had cost them everything. "She'd like this," Eli said. "Yeah, she would." "Did she ever take you here, when you were together?" "Once. We drove out on a Sunday. She packed sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, and we sat right here, right on this ridge, and she told me her grandfather used to bring her here when she was a kid. He'd point at the trees and say they were older than anything either of them would ever build, and that the best thing you could do with something that old was leave it alone." Eli was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like slow breathing. "I wish I'd known her," he said. "You do know her. You've been carrying her voice in a saddlebag for 3 weeks. You rode 400 miles because she left you a map. You stood in a courtroom and told her story to a room full of strangers." Ryder put his hand on Eli's shoulder. "You know her better than anyone." Spring came late that year, the way it always does in Montana, reluctantly, with false starts and cold mornings, and the grudging retreat of snow that had overstayed its welcome. But it came. The ice on Garner Creek broke. The roads dried. The mountains turned from white to green in slow, uneven patches, like a canvas being repainted by a hand that was in no particular hurry. Ryder rebuilt the motorcycle. Not all at once, piece by piece, over weeks, in the evenings after the shop closed and the day's work was done. Eli helped. They worked side by side in the garage, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the radio playing static because it still only picked up 2 stations, their hands black with grease, their conversation spare and practical. "Hand me that wrench, hold this steady, check the torque on that bolt." The bike came back to life the way all broken things come back to life, if they come back at all. Slowly, imperfectly, with scars that showed and joints that creaked and a sound that was slightly different from the original because the parts were new even if the frame was old. The black paint was fresh. The silver stripe was hand-painted by Eli, who'd learned the technique from a YouTube video and a steady hand he didn't know he had. On the first warm Saturday in April, they rolled it out of the garage and into the gravel lot. The sun was low and golden, the kind of late afternoon light that makes everything look like a photograph you'd want to keep. Ryder stood on one side of the bike. Eli stood on the other. Between them, the machine that had carried a family's history through 15 years of silence and rust sat gleaming, whole, waiting. "You first," Eli said. "Together," Ryder said. They rode. Up the mountain road, past the fire tower, past the bridge at Garner Creek, where the bullet holes in the timber railing had been patched with fresh planks that stood out like pale scars against the weathered wood. Past the ridge where the pines opened up, and you could see the valley spread out below. Green and wide and quiet, the kind of landscape that doesn't care about the things that happen in it, because it was here before you and will be here after. Eli rode behind Ryder, his arms around his father's waist, his chin resting on Ryder's good shoulder. The wind pushed his hair back from his forehead. The engine hummed beneath them. Not the sound it used to make, not exactly, but close enough. Close enough to be the same song played in a different key. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The road talked for them. The curves and the grades and the straightaways, the rhythm of the ride, the shared lean into each turn, the way the bike responded to 2 bodies instead of 1, adjusting, compensating, finding its balance the way all things find their balance when they stop fighting against what they're carrying and start moving with it. At the top of the mountain, where the road dead-ended at a turnaround overlooking the valley, Ryder killed the engine. They sat there in the silence, the metal ticking as it cooled, the wind moving through the grass, the sun warm on their faces. "I want to change my name," Eli said. Ryder didn't turn around. "To what?" "Vance. Eli Vance." The wind blew. A hawk circled above the valley, riding the thermals in slow, patient spirals. "Not because of blood," Eli continued. "Because of what you did. Because you came back. Because you stayed." Ryder's chest tightened. He stared at the valley and the mountains and the sky, and he felt the weight of 15 years lift. Not all at once, not completely, but enough. Enough to breathe, enough to stop bracing for the next loss. Okay, he said. They sat there until the sun touched the ridgeline and the golden light turned amber and then orange and then the deep, quiet purple of a Montana evening. Then Ryder started the engine and Eli put his arms around his father's waist, and they rode down the mountain together into the valley where the lights of the garage were waiting. A single fluorescent tube buzzing above a roll-up door, a sign that read, Vance Mechanical in hand-painted letters that no longer looked like they were trying to disappear. The motorcycle that once carried a dead man's ghost now carried a father and his son. The saddlebag that once held the evidence of a crime now held a thermos of coffee and 2 sandwiches wrapped in foil. The road that once led nowhere now led home, and every weekend after that, they rode. The same mountain roads, the same curves, the same wind, not searching for what was stolen, not running from what was lost, just riding together. The engine steady beneath them, the road open ahead, and the silence between them no longer empty but full of everything that had survived, everything that had been found, everything that had waited 15 years in a rusted saddlebag on a broken motorcycle for a boy brave enough to carry it home. Somewhere on that road, if you listened closely, you could almost hear it, the sound a family makes when it finally stops breaking and starts becoming whole.